Hello, I'm Richard Simpson. I've just recently completed a master's degree in psychology of sport and exercise. Through that, I completed this absolute monster of a thesis, 209 pages, 15,000 words, on the topic of coping and well-being within individual and team-based athletes. Through this thesis, I'll be looking to explore through a multi-method study which comprises of quantitative and qualitative elements.
Okay, so why did you decide to study this?
Very good question. I think, as all good researchers should be, they should be curious. And for me, I was very curious, especially looking at, is there any coping differences between individual and team-based athletes? Furthermore, and most importantly, is there any psychological well-being differences between individual and team-based athletes? And also, what really research has not really explored is, does psychological well-being impact the coping strategies and coping effectiveness as a subsequence? And there's a lot of literature out there that discusses about kind of different coping strategies and so on and so forth, but they haven't really reached a consensus on whether coping strategies differ between individual and team-based athletes. Furthermore, there's not a lot of research specifically into kind of well-being differences between individual and team-based athletes. As much as there's a lot more research looking into mental health, which is another phrase used for well-being. Basically a dearth of research which does not really consider impact that psychological well-being can have on performance. And I think I really want to contribute to the literature. My desire is to provoke further research to look at a possible cyclical relationship, and for me this could also inform my future ambitions to be a practitioner, knowing is a kind of cause and effect of coping on well-being, or alternatively well-being on coping. And I think it's important for academics, practitioners, coaches and athletes to be aware of, for not only performance outcomes but their own health and well-being. So through this thesis I employed what's called a multi-method study, basically underpinned by my own pragmatic philosophy. And so I believe that you can employ several epistemologies and ontologies. And particularly I employed what's called a qualitatively driven multi-method. I handed out several questionnaires for around 80 student-athlete participants, and they would fill out demographics, and then 2 questionnaires that consisted of a coping questionnaire, which is the M-COPE, modified COPE questionnaire. And then this was also followed by a psychological well-being questionnaire called the Warwick-Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Scale. Now both these questionnaires are both on a kind of Likert type scale, so 1 to 5 kind of rates your perceived response in line with the criteria and questions asked. I gave participants the opportunity to opt in to be included within the 2 focus groups to kind of follow up on these findings, which included an individual focus group, so within sports such as badminton, squash, archery, for a varied example, and then team-based sports for the likes of your football, your rugby union, your rugby league, hockey and netball. Ran several tests which include a Man-Whitney U test due to data not being normally distributed, which is a shame, and also conducted multiple analyses with predictive influence. And then for the qualitative, I conducted an abductive thematic analysis. Now, abductive thematic analysis is when you include both inductive analysis, so you're generating ideas from the text, and also deductive analysis, so you're kind of taking from the literature to see if there's any similarities with your data. Thereon I would have 2 sets of data, textual data and then numerical data, which would hopefully give a kind of in-depth analysis of, is there a kind of influence of well-being on coping, and is there coping differences in individual and team-based athletes? So from the quantitative results, and as I was kind of describing, data was not normally distributed, which is not uncommon in studies. Bear into account that could be due to maybe my sample size or the kind of variety in the answers provided. So from my quantitative results, I was looking for coping differences. There was no significant differences, which again adds to the kind of consensus that no one knows if there's truly coping differences between individual and team-based athletes, because multiple studies suggest several things. Alternatively, I also, through my quantitative findings, found no predictive influence of well-being on coping. So I found some small differences using the M-COPE scales that suggested potentially well-being does impact coping. However, overall it could not be generalised. Through my qualitative findings, I was discussing basically about eudaimonic and hedonic dimensions and how these might affect subsequent effectiveness of coping. As much as there were kind of differences between team-based and individual-based in terms of their descriptions, for example, individual-based athletes suggested that their hedonic well-being impacted how they coped, whilst it was more evident that eudaimonic well-being affected how team-based athletes coped. One common and one important finding for further research is the suggestion that there would be a cyclical relationship that may exist between coping and well-being. So rather than one influencing the other, they both cyclically influence one another. So, potential implications from my findings, as I've suggested, and I am quite new to academia and as a researcher, it wasn't the most robust study in the world, and I think that's okay to admit when your research isn't as robust, because you can learn from it, and also further research can learn from your mistakes. One of the key findings I found from it, despite not finding any significant differences, was from the qualitative component, the idea that a cyclical relationship may exist between coping and well-being, and hopefully for future academics they could explore this relationship a lot more robustly. For practitioners and coaches, hopefully this provides a bit of evidence to suggest that coping and well-being should really be taken as seriously as one another. As much as it's not evident and succinct that my findings mean this or mean that, not only can it kickstart further research looking into the cyclical relationship, but hopefully practitioners and coaches can start to providing interventions for coping strategies as important as providing interventions for maintaining and deepening psychological well-being. People can come and do my study a lot better. Hopefully maybe I have opportunity to go and do it better